Paris, I have for many years viewed you as a national treasure, and I have felt greatly honored to have been brought into your orbit, as it were, because I was a member of India 16, and I think it is one of the wonderful parts of my life. And I thought it would be appropriate to start with India. So you and your wife were in India when this country started out. India has changed a lot in 50 years or more, 60 years. And the United States has changed a lot.
What you've just said is music to my bad ears. I look back, and I'm very happy now to be with you and know what you and India 16 was of great interest to me, and to see how you're thinking now, at least is as interesting as anything I'm going to say to you. So I think that the last time I was in India, it was with John Lewis, after Obama had been elected, but before the inauguration. And John got together a small group of legislators and invited me to join as an ex-legislator to go to the same places that Martin Luther King went in India when he had his trip to India. And Luther King, I had suggested to him that he ought to go to India while Gandhi was there and fulfill his good studying of Gandhi, but get it directly from Gandhi. Gandhi was no more. He was stabbed in Harlem, King was, and had to postpone the trip that was set up. So I couldn't go in the end on that trip. But this time, because I was college president and had other duties, but the trip with John Lewis was sentimentally quite extraordinary. We went on the Gandhi Trail there. Population grown, buildings everywhere. I was not happy to see the continuing Indian National Congress influence, which was, it's just now that I have a sense of, from the Modi and the new administration, the new prime minister, I think there's great promise there in terms of reviving the spirit of Gandhi. The United States, we're talking at a time when I think the state of our politics is about as disturbing and negative as any time in my life. But that's a complicated thing. The happiest time about the country was the unity we had in World War II. From being attacked, it produced national unity of a kind that I've never seen since then. But so I'm a little bit, as we're talking now, a little bit more optimistic about change in India being promising. As the largest democracy in the world, we should hope it is moving in a way that will be closer to the vision that Gandhi had. In this country, I don't know where to put my hope at the moment.
Speaking of our country, you have had the distinction of being a U.S. Senator, and that gives you a particular insight into our political system. And you've been CEO of the Corporation for National and Community Service, so you know the operation of the government from an important agency. But your association, the association that we are particularly interested in is with the Peace Corps. And you've written about this and you've spoken about this, but as you are writing your memoirs and thinking about your time with the Peace Corps, you have just said to me, for example, that the time in Ethiopia was one of the most interesting times that you had. So if maybe you could give us a few thoughts about what was special about Ethiopia, and then what was special about India 16.
Let me just say what's special. Begin with what's special about my luck. I was lucky to get elected to the Senate when I was 44 points behind in the polls. And then I was unlucky to be defeated by Rick Santorum. And you're continuing the habit that people have of politeness, not for the reason you did it here, but in introducing me, no one has ever said I was defeated by Rick Santorum. And it's sort of an interesting, because of his controversial role, it's an interesting point. But the point is I've had a victory and a defeat. I've operated on the assumption that people probably would be more interested in the defeat than the victory, that failures are of more interest than, as we know by the press. For me, the non-failure, most delighting was the adventure in Ethiopia as the director of the Ethiopia program and the representative of Kennedy for Africa south of the Sahara. It was 2 wonderful years. Not as wonderful or as there's something about actually being a Peace Corps volunteer that it makes me understand why volunteers in those days talked about the staff as sort of an unnecessary group of people.
Yes.
So you're the real thing. You're the Peace Corps volunteer. But if you're sort of probing back and measuring, you need to add national service as the twin big desire of mine as to what could grow and grow and grow until it's really changing the country. And that is a mixed bag of what is failure and what is success. My wife contends that the difference between us is her sense of duty is to do what you don't want to do, but you do because you're convinced that you ought to do it. And you, she said of me, your sense of duty is to find what delights you the most and declare it the common good. And so
That's great.
I had a wife who was skeptical of my going on the march from Selma to Montgomery and skeptical of going to India on our fellowship and skeptical of a lot of the politics of this time. Now, she ended agreeing with me that as our family, India as a new home and place, excuse me, I meant to say Ethiopia at that point. I think she would say that in terms of the family, it was one of the great occasions for all my three children as well as for me. Just as my grandmother took me around the world when I was 12 years old in 1938, 37, 38, for 6 months. And I've tried to do a 6-week version with my 4 older grandsons. And the common good of seeing both the Peace Corps grow to something is not only is known everywhere, but touches the whole of the American people in terms of learning about the world and learning of what you want to do differently in this country. Kennedy said, as you've heard me say many times, that as we set off for Ethiopia in 1962 as a family and 300 volunteers, pretty soon we got to 500 volunteers, which is what Emperor Haile Selassie wanted, to double the number of secondary school teachers in Ethiopia. And that kind of experience, I believe, needs to be part of the definition of what higher education is. And that would be service at home or for service abroad. Some period of intense service outside of your culture. And Peace Corps has given me some of my opportunities to be that, India and Ethiopia being the two most important. But we also had a summer of working on a kibbutz in Israel. And
You did? Your
yes,
family?
Yes, because the same people that were Scott Buchanan and Stringfellow Barr of St. John's College, they read the Trial and Error by Weizmann, the first president of scientists, and it was an example, the same 50 years of the Indian National Congress, from forming it and getting independence, roughly the same 50 years that the World Zionist Congress started and got independence.
For Israel.
And the Foundation for World Government believed that in understanding what to do about the world, Israel, before it became a state and before the vicious circle of Jew and Muslim,
Right.
it had all of those 50 years building outside of government, against the Sultan and against the British. The Zionist movement, without state power, built universities, a school system, a banking system, and they thought it was a model or an example of what could happen in world development.
And you spent some time there on a kibbutz before we went there as in 65.
Yes, we
You were there in the 1950s then in the kibbutz?
Summer of 1950. We were on kibbutz Ein HaShafet, eye of the judge, or well of the judge. Brandeis was the advisor for that group of Americans merging with a Polish group who had been burned down in the desert, and they were combined as a kibbutz. It's been interesting seeing its history during these years. That was why it was in my head when we were stuck with India 16 train ready to go to India, and the President of the United States, Lyndon Johnson, trying to make Nehru give up Kashmir, which was the home of Nehru's family and his great beloved place, and was the most difficult thing he could ask. He said, no more Peace Corps until Nehru does what I'm saying. And Johnson was on the way to being one of the great presidents, and the Vietnam War, changed how we measure that. But he loved the Peace Corps, but he didn't love it enough to realize that that Nehru would not view the stopping of the Peace Corps coming as a sanction that would have any impact, because I was with Shriver when we went around the world. In India, for example, was about the fifth stop, to see whether they want the Peace Corps. And Nehru was very friendly to Shriver, but he said, Mr. Shriver, people have been coming from afar for a long time, and they come with great hopes of what they're going to do to change India, and after the centuries passed or years passed, they go, and India is more or less the same. And of course that isn't quite what is the story about the Punjab, the Green Revolution and other things. But he said, I want you to make sure they're not going to be disappointed if they don't leave something that is
make a difference.
Make a great difference. And he said, but we will welcome a small group coming. I'm sure that your president would be pleased to do it, and I'm pleased to offer the invitation. That was more or less the pitch. And here's Johnson saying, if he won't, until the Peace Corps isn't going to go over there. Every day, Shriver or somebody was lobbying the White House to give the word to go. The war is over there, and you finally got the word you could go, and Johnson didn't get what he wanted.
If I can back up a bit, Israel was after our training at St. John's.
Yes.
And remind us
Well,
how
St.
we
John's
happened to
was
be at
my
St.
prejudice.
John's. Yeah.
I was in charge of experimental training programs.
Mhm.
It got a number of places, trained the people going, for example, to Canada, to French-speaking villages for Dartmouth's training program. In Atlanta, they moved into, and in Boston, into black areas training programs that were going to Africa. And so when we were stuck with India 16, I perked up and said, well, it'd be a great experience to go to India, especially if we could find, you were going to do chicken poultry, right?
Right.
If they can do the technical, if they can get a farm experienced person, the Great Book's approach would meet the congressional requirement that they get trained in what American democracy was, and that the great classics would, as the intellectual side of it, would be meeting that requirement of Congress. That they'd be trained in what American democracy was all about. It would might work, and we got permission to do it. St. John's liked the idea. We had a big battle because they said we only knew to do the Western great books because we're not fit yet to deal with the Bhagavad Gita or the Indian classics. And they were ready to take Gandhi and his writings, but not very enthusiastic about probing the culture. You know more about what you think of the program there than 100 times more than I do, but that's how it started.
it was a great program, and I've wondered. My impression was that it was not repeated. It was not repeated.
You mean
It
going
did
to
not-
Israel some more?
No, the St. John's, St. John's Great
St.
Books program
John's.
was not repeated, and I've sort of wondered why there were not more training programs that did the Great Books in St. John's.
Well, for one thing, Shriver and I left. We weren't there. Secondly, there was big growing competition among big universities to do training. The training for Ethiopia was at Georgetown, which could do a good program, but it was a terrible one. It was all lectures, nothing but lectures, no back and forth. And instead of going back to them, we went to UCLA, I guess. They were competing, and they were ready to do all sorts of more appropriate training than we did there. So I don't know that St. John's applied.
Okay.
I think universities have the capacity to do more than they could do. Or maybe you shocked them and they didn't need the campus to become a chicken farm.
If I may fast forward, when Barack Obama was campaigning, you were advising him on some areas, and as I remember, you
National service.
contributed. Yes, you contributed language to a speech that he gave, in which he talked about Americans serving side by side with volunteers from other countries. We're now coming to the end of Barack Obama's 8 years as president, and we've seen him no more able to double the Peace Corps than his two predecessors were. How do you feel about Barack Obama, President Obama, and his commitment to the Peace Corps or national service?
Well, you have to discount my strong loyalty to Barack Obama. I think he's the wisest president since Abraham Lincoln. And I think he's had the hardest deck of cards on many fronts, foreign policy and the economy, of any since Roosevelt. And now there was a task force that Obama formed. A half dozen people were involved. Alan Casey of City Year and National Service and others, and this is a task force on national service, and we gave him proposals, and by and large, the speechwriters picked up what we had proposed, and Obama approved it. He, along with inviting me to introduce him at the Philadelphia race speech, he asked me to go out to Iowa for the national service speech, and it included doubling the Peace Corps, and it included that the president, as president, he would urge other countries to form their own corps so that they could be work side by side with other volunteers from other countries. It would be a new step forward. Obama seemed to like that part of it very much. What happened on that one is easier to explain. In each of the countries where there was some effort to get him to propose that, I think Indonesia was maybe the most active one. We were urging that it get on the agenda to talk to the Indonesian government about that. Whether it was in the instructions or not, I don't know, but I think issues were sufficiently hot in other ways that it didn't, as far as I know, it wasn't proposed with Indonesia, where we pushed rather hard to get him to briefed on it and to propose it. Now that's the fate of the Peace Corps in general, that it's viewed as nice and good, but when it comes down to the budget, or it comes down to your time with the president of another country, there are always the issues that are more important, or so that side of it has been very. Everything requiring money has become very difficult very early to do. It's not the first time. The Peace Corps has not become a controversial factor the way AmeriCorps and the idea of large-scale national service is. And Peace Corps, by and large, has nobody that's trying to stop the Peace Corps, but they're Democrat and Republican. Sam Farr is a wonderful exception. It's been very hard to get Democrats on my side of the aisle, let alone the Republicans, to think it's a priority. And when the Vietnam War caused Johnson to cut back the National Service Program, which was part of when Shriver was asking for billions of dollars expansion of the War on Poverty, with VISTA, Volunteers in Service to America, growing. He said it needed to grow the way the Civilian Conservation Corps in terms of size, and they were planning to really go forward. It was part of what Johnson, however much he loved that, cut it all back. The Peace Corps was 16,000 in '66 when Shriver left and I left the same year, and we were sick with counting the people in training. It was 16,000. It was scheduled to go to 25,000 in the next year or so, and the vice president had said by 1950 we'll be at 50,000. There was a lot of expanding hope, and Johnson cut it back to about 10,000, and the Republican and Nixon cut it down to 5,000 or a little less.
Less.
And we've never got beyond 8,000 since then.
Where do you see Peace Corps 20 years from now or 50 years from now? Do you think it'll have more than 8,000 volunteers out there?
Until there is somebody elected president or something happening in the country that says we want to do this on a big scale, it'll be more or less the way it is now. I don't know about 50 years what's going to happen to the climate and a few other things, but it seems to me both the idea of adding to the definition and the investment in every American having the opportunity to get the education and make the contribution that the Peace Corps and National Service is all about. That idea, I think, could blossom in some form. I would suspect it would be a form in which it's less government-run and more based on civic organizations.
Private initiative, the private sector.
Private sector, both first place in both national service at home and national service of the Peace Corps kind. in both cases, the planners of it, including Shriver, said that the great institutions of education, higher education, should be major carriers of both of those ideas.
Harris, could you say a word about the Franklin Project? Because I'm not sure that's I think it's not well known among you.
General McChrystal came home under a cloud, but was asked to give a talk at the Aspen Institute, and he and backed by the chief of staff, but McChrystal primarily, extemporaneously said, we think that national unity and the sense of everyone's duty for citizens as citizens, it should be. We might like it to be the draft reestablished with civilian and military needs part of the drafting, but there appears to be no. Some of us who feel that, he said, there's no real political prospect. Independent sector does have the capacity, and he gave this talk saying that we think that size should be at least as large of full-time service, of national service, which would include Peace Corps. He said would be it would be an idea that could catch the imagination of people, and he found that at this Ideas Conference huge support for the idea of it being an opportunity for every American, and to fund it in a way that would enable it to be the size of the military as a big sort of goal. I'm not sure that's a great goal to set, but in any case. So McChrystal has been following through this. Aspen adopted it as a program.
The near-term objective is legislation that would establish funding for national service?
One of the wise things about McChrystal, whom I'm very impressed with and is very seriously pursuing this, is that it's not focused on legislation. It's the battle for the budget with both the Peace Corps and National AmeriCorps, the Corporation for National Service, and VISTA, and the Civilian Conservation Corps. The battle is underway right now. I was drafted to be CEO of the Corporation for National Service after being defeated in the wave of Republicans carrying both houses, and the House of Representatives repeatedly was terminating AmeriCorps in the Clinton years, and lo and behold, look at it now. This Congress that came upon the citizens' gift to Barack Obama's presidency, they started proposing termination of national service. They until this year they had not actually talked about terminating the Peace Corps, and I think there's almost no support for terminating the Peace Corps. Moreover, men composing the government are not to be regarded as enemies. To regard them as such will be contrary to the nonviolent spirit. Part we must, but as friends. Sorry, I can't go out to you. I'd like the place you're meeting. I love the idea of India 16, the existence in reality, in coming together is it makes a lot of sense.
Harris, I can say that the members of India 16 are will be eternally grateful to you for the experience that we had at St. John's College, in Israel, and in India, and beyond. And so I have personally benefited as much as any, and we will miss you, but we will be thinking of you, and it won't be the last. You will hear from us.
We're able to be there and enjoy it with you. The senator who died early, and he had the idea of young people going to Alaska and farm communes. And I was in the session with Eleanor Roosevelt about our student federalists and world federalism, and I wasn't happy that this other guy was in our tea with her at the White House. So I heard his idea about this, and Eleanor then said, "Mr. McGovern," or whatever his name was, I just have to ask you to do one thing before you go all the way to Alaska. Go to an American farm. You may find that there's some people that don't like living with the chickens and the cows." She said it would be so sad if they go all the way to Alaska and discover they just can't stand living with the chickens and the cows. That became a family joke about the chickens and Eleanor and the chickens and the cows.
That's a great one.